testimony. This isn't just about politics, it's about a through line of deceit that changed the United States forever. Let's get the full story.
I sit here right now, I can't remember specific conversations. I do remember that we knew that a sort of First Amendment defense would be part of the case. And I think when I mentioned to you earlier about how to frame the case, we want to make clear that this was not about trying to interfere with anyone's First Amendment rights, that this was a fraud. And as you know, under Supreme Court precedent, fraud is not protected by the First Amendment. And so in my mind, it was important to make that clear in the indictment. And that's why when we litigated this issue before the district court, we prevailed.
But the president's statements that he believed the election was rife with fraud, those certainly are statements that are protected by the First Amendment, correct?
Absolutely not. If they are made to target a lawful government function and they're made with knowing falsity. No, they're not. That was my point about fraud not being protected by the First Amendment.
I mean, there's a long list of disputed elections. I mean, the election of 1800, 1960, year 2000, where candidates believe they were wronged by because they lost. And there's a long history of candidates speaking out about they believe there's been fraud, there's been other problems with the integrity of the election process. And I think you would agree that those types of statements are sort of at the core of the First Amendment rights of a presidential candidate, right?
There is no historical analog for what President Trump did in this case. As we said in the indictment, he was free to say that he thought he won the election. He was even free to say falsely that he won the election. But what he was not free to do was violate federal law and use knowingly false statements about election fraud to target a lawful government function. That he was not allowed to do. And that differentiates this case from any past history.
Next, Special Counsel Jack Smith.
There's a lot of inferences and accusations being made about your bias as a special counsel's office. And I want to make sure that we rebut these in the first hour. I think it's important too. So did the Attorney General or any other DOJ official ever press you to be more aggressive in your investigation of President Donald J. Trump?
No.
Did the Attorney General or any other DOJ official ever suggest that you were expected to bring charges against President Trump?
No.
Did anyone from the White House, including President Biden, ever tell you they expected you to bring charges against Donald Trump?
No.
When you eventually did bring charges against Donald Trump, how did you make that decision? Walk us through it at a high level, if you don't mind.
Sure. It was based on the facts and based on the law. I ultimately made that decision, but I consulted with my team of prosecutors on that case, who were outstanding public servants, people with great experience in complex investigations. I took their advice and counsel in making that decision, and I tried to consider all factors, including both the strength of the case that we believed we had, possible defenses, all things of that nature.
So which based on what you just said, it sounds like you made this prosecution decision based on the evidence in the law. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What would you have done if you felt any improper pressure from a DOJ official or the White House?
I think people who know me and have known my reputation would know that would not end well. If someone tried to pressure me to move a case in one direction or the other wasn't supported by the law, I wouldn't stand for it. And I would also say the people who worked in my office wouldn't stand for that.
The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of what has happened since the 2024 election. As we speak, a sweeping campaign of retribution is unfolding within the Department of Justice. We are seeing career public servants, people who have served both Republican and Democratic presidents for decades, being fired without explanation. One specific story Jack Smith shared during this testimony illustrates the human cost of this moment. He spoke of an FBI agent who had served his country overseas in war zones. This agent was fired for simply doing his job. He was fired 2 weeks after his wife died. Jack Smith attended that funeral, and he described a church full of public servants who are now living in fear. This is the climate in which this deposition took place. The president has publicly called Jack Smith a deranged lunatic and a criminal.
According to the Justice Department, discussion of Volume 2 of the Special Counsel's report and any information or conclusions in Volume 2 or in drafts thereof is specifically prohibited by Judge Cannon's January 21st, 2025 order. This morning, just over an hour ago, the Department of Justice sent us an email affirming its view that Judge Cannon's order applies to Mr. Smith and that it precludes him from disclosing any non-public information that may be contained in Volume 2, including, but not limited to, interview transcripts, search warrant materials, business records, toll records, video footage, records obtained by grand jury subpoenas, attorney-client communications, and potential Rule 404B evidence. This restriction significantly limits Mr. Smith's ability to discuss the classified documents case. Nevertheless, Mr. Smith is committed to doing his best to answering questions consistent with the department's guidance. And I ask that that email from the Department of Justice that was sent earlier this morning be made part of the record.
The president's chief of staff has confirmed that the administration is pursuing criminal prosecutions against perceived adversaries as part of a campaign of retribution. Even the law firm representing Jack Smith, Covington, and Burling has been targeted by an executive order designed to pull their government contracts and strip their lawyers of security clearances. It is an attempt to chill anyone from even associating with the former special counsel. Against this backdrop of intense personal and professional pressure, Jack Smith spent 8 hours answering questions. He didn't hide behind legal jargon. He spoke plainly. He was there to defend the work of his team. He was there to defend the career prosecutors and FBI agents who have been vilified by the most powerful person in the world. And most importantly, he was there to lay out what he calls the through line of deceit. The story Jack Smith tells is not about a difference of opinion. It is not about hardscrabble politics. It is about a coordinated criminal scheme to overturn an election and prevent the lawful transfer of power. It is about a candidate who knew he lost, was told he lost by everyone he trusted, and decided to fight anyway. This is the narrative that the majority on the committee, led by Chairman Jim Jordan, tried to dismantle. But the facts in the record are stubborn things. During the first hour of the deposition, the questioning focused heavily on a famous speech from 1940. Chairman Jordan quoted Robert Jackson, a former Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice, who spoke about the dangerous power of a prosecutor to pick the man and then search for a crime to pin on him. Jordan was trying to suggest that Jack Smith had targeted Donald Trump for political reasons, but Jack Smith's response was clinical. He agreed with the principles Robert Jackson laid out. He agreed that a prosecutor acting from malice is a terrible force, but then he turned it back to the evidence. He explained that when he took the job, he had no preconceived outcome. He didn't know the facts yet. He said that if the facts and the law had not justified moving forward, he would have been perfectly comfortable closing the investigations. He has done that throughout his 30-year career. But in this case, the facts were different. Smith explained that his investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the former president engaged in a criminal conspiracy. He wasn't just guessing. He had the testimony of Republican officials who put their country before their party. He had the records of the phone calls. He had the emails from the co-conspirators themselves. One of the most revealing parts of the testimony dealt with the big lie. Smith explained that his team focused on what the former president actually knew. The strength of our case and why we felt we had such strong proof is our witnesses were not going to be political enemies of the president. They were going to be political allies. We had numerous witnesses who would say, I voted for President Trump. I campaigned for President Trump. I wanted him to win. The Speaker of the House in Arizona, the Speaker of the House in Michigan. We had an elector in Pennsylvania who is a former congressman who was going to be an elector for President Trump, who said that what they were trying to do was an attempt to overthrow the government and illegal. Our case
was built on, frankly, Republicans who put their allegiance to the country before the party. And so the president got information from people he trusted on other issues. He rejected it whenever it didn't fit him staying in office. And there was a pattern in our case where anytime any information came in that would mean he could no longer be president, he would reject it. And any theory, no matter how far-fetched, no matter how not based in law, that would indicate that he could, he latched onto that. And we were confident that we had very strong proof of that pattern. He also, I would just add, very consciously did not try to reach out to the sort of people who have the most expertise on these issues. He reached out to people who he thought could back.
They found that some of the highest-ranking officials in the administration, including the vice president, told the president directly that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. The campaign manager told him that claims about non-citizens voting in Arizona were false. The Senate Majority Leader in Michigan told him he lost because he underperformed with educated women, not because of fraud. Yet, after being told these things, the president didn't stop. He didn't look for the truth. In fact, Smith noted a very deliberate pattern. The president avoided anyone with expertise who might tell him the truth. Instead, he reached out only to people who he thought would back him up. He latched on to any theory, no matter how far-fetched or how clearly it contradicted the law, if it meant he could stay in office. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a strategy. Smith pointed to the 7 states that were targeted: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These were all states the president lost by small margins. And in each of these states, the president and his co-conspirators tried to pressure Republican officials to ignore the true vote counts. Take the example of Georgia. We all remember the phone call where the president asked the Secretary of State to find 11,680 votes. But Smith's investigation goes deeper. He describes how the president issued a threat on that call, telling the Secretary of State that not reporting the fraud was a criminal offense and a big risk. This happened after the Secretary of State had already debunked the claims of dead voters and suitcase ballots multiple times. Then there is the fake electors plot. This is a part of the story that still feels difficult to believe even after all this time. The plan was to organize people who would have been the president's electors if he had won and have them sign false certificates claiming they were the legitimate ones. Jack Smith's team found that many of these people were actually deceived by the president's own team. They were told the certificates would only be used if they won their court cases. But Smith's investigation showed that was a lie. The co-conspirators intended to use those fake certificates to obstruct the certification on January 6th, regardless of what happened in court. One elector in Pennsylvania saw exactly what was happening. He called the plan illegal and an attempt to overthrow the government. He refused to participate. But in other states, the plan moved forward. This leads us to the events of January 6th itself. During the deposition, Jack Smith made a very definitive statement that is now at the center of the political debate. He said that the attack on the Capitol does not happen without Donald Trump. He caused it, he exploited it, and the violence was foreseeable to him. Smith reminded the committee that on the night of January 5th, the president remarked to his advisors that his supporters were angry. He knew they were coming to Washington because he had told them to be there and promised it would be wild. And then during his speech at the Ellipse, he told them to fight like hell or they wouldn't have a country anymore. What happened next is a matter of historical record, but Smith adds a chilling layer of detail. While the violence was unfolding at the Capitol, while over 140 law enforcement officers were being assaulted, the president was sitting in his dining room watching it on television. He was reviewing Twitter on his phone. He was being told by his advisors that a riot was happening and that people were in the building. Instead of calling for calm, he issued a tweet at 2:24 p.m. attacking his own vice president. He said Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. Jack Smith pointed out that this tweet was issued at a time when the president knew the violence was ongoing. It was essentially fueling the fire. 1 minute after that tweet was sent, the Secret Service had to evacuate the vice president to a secure location. When an advisor rushed into the dining room to tell the president that his vice president was being moved for his safety, The president's response was a simple, "So what?" Throughout that entire afternoon, as rioters were hunting for lawmakers and chanting "Hang Mike Pence," the president resisted calls from his own staff to issue a calming message. He repeatedly said the people were angry because the election had been stolen. When he finally did tell them to go home, he told them he loved them and that they were very special. Now, the majority on the committee spent a lot of time during the deposition asking about toll records. These are records of who called whom, when, and for how long. They don't include the content of the calls. Some members of Congress, including Senator Josh Hawley, have claimed that their phones were tapped. Jack Smith was unequivocal on this point. No phones were tapped. There were no wiretaps. His office lawfully subpoenaed these records because they were relevant to the investigation. Why were they relevant? Because on the evening of January 6th, while the Capitol was still being cleared of rioters, the president and his associates were making calls to members of Congress. They were urging them to further delay the certification. Smith made a point that cut through the outrage of the committee members. He said, "I did not choose those members. President Trump did." He explained that if the president had directed those calls to Democrats, his office would have subpoenaed the records of Democrats. The records followed the conduct, and the conduct was a targeted search for allies who might be willing to help overturn the results of an election. As we move into the second half of this story, we have to talk about the other major investigation, the classified documents case. This is where the story shifts from the Capitol to the ballrooms and bathrooms of Mar-a-Lago. Jack Smith's team brought 40 charges in this case, including 32 counts of willful retention of national defense information. These were top secret and secret documents that, if disclosed, could cause exceptionally grave damage to our national security. The indictment contains photos that have become famous: boxes stacked on a ballroom stage, boxes in a business center, and boxes in a bathroom and shower. The narrative in this case is about a refusal to comply with the law. Smith explained that the government gave the former president multiple opportunities to return these documents voluntarily. The National Archives asked for them back. They were rebuffed for months. When they finally got some boxes back, they found highly classified material and realized more was missing. Then came a grand jury subpoena. Instead of complying, the evidence showed a coordinated effort to conceal the boxes from the government and even from the president's own lawyers. Between May and June of 2022, a total of 64 boxes were moved from a storage room to the president's residence. When the lawyer arrived to search for classified documents to satisfy the subpoena, only 30 boxes were returned to the storage room. The lawyer searched what he thought was everything, but he didn't know that dozens of boxes had been hidden from him. Even more troubling was the attempt to delete security camera footage. The investigation found that after the Department of Justice sent a draft subpoena for the surveillance video, the president had a 24-minute call with his property manager, Carlos de Oliveira. Shortly after that, de Oliveira told an IT employee that the boss wanted the server deleted. When the employee said he didn't know how to do that, de Oliveira persisted, asking, "What are we going to do?" Jack Smith's testimony makes it clear that he believes this was an open and shut case of obstruction. He stated under oath that his office had proof beyond a reasonable doubt in both cases. He was confident that if they had gone to trial, they would have secured convictions. But they didn't go to trial. And this is where the story takes a turn into the legal and political reality we live in now. The Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling on presidential immunity. They ruled that a president has absolute immunity for core official acts and presumptive immunity for other official acts. Jack Smith was asked if this ruling exonerated the former president. His answer was a firm no. He explained that while the ruling changed the way they had to present the case, the core evidence remained powerful. In his view, the heart of the case was not about a president acting in his official capacity. It was about a candidate acting in his private capacity to cling to power. He gave an analogy that is worth remembering. He called the scheme an affinity fraud. This is a type of fraud where someone builds up trust with a group of people and then preys on that trust to rip them off. He said the president had people who trusted him, people in his own party, and he used that trust to try to get them to violate their oaths. But even though Smith was prepared to move forward with a superseding indictment that removed the immunized conduct, the 2024 election changed everything. Under long-standing Department of Justice policy, a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. Once it was clear that Donald Trump would be inaugurated, Jack Smith was required to move to dismiss the cases. This brings us to the present moment and the Volume 2 controversy. As we discussed earlier, Volume 1 of Smith's report was released, detailing the election interference case. But Volume 2, which deals with the classified documents, remains under seal. This is because of an order from Judge Aileen Cannon. During the deposition, Jack Smith was asked about Volume 2 over and over again, and every time he gave a similar answer. I cannot answer that question due to Judge Cannon's injunction. He was so careful not to violate the order that he even refused to review Volume 2 before the deposition, even though the Department of Justice offered it to him. He said he didn't want any implication that he was violating the order. This has created what some on the committee called an untenable asymmetry. The public is being told by the president's allies that the investigation was a weaponized partisan attack. But the central document that explains exactly what the special counsel found and why he brought the charges is being kept secret. Jack Smith's team and many members of the committee have argued that the public interest in this document is profound. They point out that reports from previous special counsels, like Robert Mueller, John Durham, and Robert Hur, were all made public. They argue that the American people have a right to know how their Department of Justice investigated a former president, especially since the president is now back in office and firing the people who conducted that investigation. The consequences of this secret history are already being felt. We are seeing a complete rewriting of the narrative around January 6th. The president has issued sweeping pardons for 77 individuals related to the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. He has pardoned rioters who were caught on video violently assaulting police officers. He has called these people patriots and hostages. Jack Smith was asked what message this sends to the country. He said it was awful and contrary to the rule of law. He pointed out that some of the people who were pardoned have already gone on to commit other serious crimes. He argued that pardoning people who assaulted law enforcement is simply wrong. This leads to the most serious development in this entire saga, the destruction of the institutions that are supposed to prevent this from happening again. Jack Smith spoke with deep concern about the dismantling of the Public Integrity Section of the Department of Justice. This is the office that was formed after Watergate to prosecute complex corruption cases around the country. It is the office that serves as a gatekeeper to make sure investigations of public figures are done the right way. Smith warned that when you take away the expertise of these career prosecutors, you lose the ability to prosecute public corruption at all. You lose the people who can teach young lawyers how to be public servants instead of political loyalists. He called it a return to the patronage system, where you only get a job in government if you have a political allegiance to the president. He said these systems are always rife with not only corruption, but incompetence. As we wrap up this look at the testimony of Jack Smith, it's worth considering his final words on his own role. He was asked why he accepted this job in the first place, knowing the attacks that would come. He said it was because he thought he was the right person for the job. He had 30 years of experience. He knew it would be challenging, but he believed that if the same facts had involved a Democratic president like Barack Obama or Joe Biden, he would have done the exact same thing. He said, "I would never take orders from a political leader to hamper another person in an election. That's not who I am." He insisted that his office had only one North Star: to follow the facts and the law wherever they led. Whether you believe him or not often depends on your own political perspective, but the 8 hours of testimony he gave under oath provide a record that is difficult to ignore. It is a story of a prosecutor who believed he had the proof of a crime and a system of government that, for a variety of reasons, prevented that proof from ever being shown to a jury. We are now in a period of consequences. The people who investigated the president are being fired. The people who attacked the Capitol are being pardoned, and the reports that explain why any of this happened are being kept in a vault. Jack Smith ended his testimony by saying he is eyes wide open about the retribution that is coming for him. He knows the president wants him in jail, but he also said he is comforted by the knowledge that he did his work with integrity, impartiality, and an uncompromising commitment to the rule of law. He concluded by noting that no man in this country is so high that he is above the law. That is a principle that has guided the United States for over 200 years. But as Jack Smith walked out of that room on December 17th, it was clear that principle is currently facing its greatest test. The transcript of this deposition is over 250 pages long. It contains details about everything from the beautiful mind boxes to the text messages between Steve Bannon and the president's team. It is a document that reinforces the historical record at a moment when that record is being actively challenged. If you want to understand the current state of the American justice system, you have to look at these two competing stories. One is a story of weaponization and political harassment. The other is a story of affinity fraud and a through line of deceit. One of these stories is backed by the power of the presidency. The other is currently resting in the hands of a man who says he is not afraid, but who knows he has a target on his back. We will continue to follow the efforts to release Volume 2 of the report. The 11th Circuit has set a deadline of January 2nd for Judge Cannon to address the orders keeping that volume sealed. It is a deadline that is only days away, and it may be the last chance the American public has to see the full evidence before the story is completely rewritten. This is a narrative driven by facts, by documents, and by the words of the people who were in the room. It is a story that doesn't need exaggeration to be powerful. It just needs to be told clearly. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Jack Smith deposition. We know this was a long-form look at a complex topic, but in a moment this serious, we believe the details matter. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel for more factual, narrative-driven news updates. We will be here to cover the next developments as they happen. For now, that is the state of the story. A career prosecutor, an 8-hour deposition, and a country waiting to see what happens when the rule of law meets the campaign of retribution. Good night.